Welcome to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and today I'm bringing you a very special episode from none other than Ancient Origins. Normally, you would have to be a part of their premium membership in order to actually get access to their awesome webinars, lectures, and talks, but they wanted you to see what they had to offer that makes them worthy of your membership. And honestly, I cannot recommend them enough. And so before we get started, if you want to become a premium member, check out the links in the video description below. It's going to take you to their website to where you can take advantage of all of the awesome work that they are doing to help people like me and you better understand the past that we all love. From the fringe to the mainstream, they bring you the very best of everything. But this episode deals with a subject that I picked personally because I knew you would all love it, and that is none other than focusing on the late Bronze Age collapse and the sea peoples who contributed to that very collapse itself.
This production is brought to you by Ancient Origins, reconstructing the story of humanity's past, and the YouTube channel, The Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Ancient Origins Premium Talk to an Expert Chat, An Age of Heroes, tracing the sea peoples through ancient mythology. My name is Alicia, and I'm part of the Ancient Origins team. One of the most important areas of knowledge for human beings is our beginnings. However, the story is always changing, and we all need to keep up. With that in mind, Ancient Origins brings together top experts and authors, examines sacred writings, tours ancient places, and questions mysterious happenings. Today we are joined by Petros Koutoupis for his premier Talk to an Expert Chat with Ancient Origins Premium. Petros is the author of Biblical Origins, An Adopted Legacy. Petros is here to discuss some of the ancient mythology and documentation about the enigmatic sea peoples.
Hello, and good afternoon, or evening, or morning. I guess it all depends on where you are located. Welcome to my presentation on An Age of Heroes, tracing the sea peoples through ancient mythology. I am Petros Koutoupis, and today I will sit down with you and share a story of myth and legend, and the truths that would inspire these legends. So who am I? Again, my name is Petros Koutoupis. I have been an independent researcher for the last 2 decades. My initial area of focus was the history surrounding the Old Testament, predominantly on the authorship of its books. I was, and still am, a firm believer of the documentary hypothesis. This research has been published in 2007 and 2008, the second of which is accessible to Ancient Origins Premium members. Under the list of books, it will be listed as Biblical Origins, An Adopted Legacy. So be sure to check it out. It was around 2009 that I began to shift this focus more toward the late Bronze Age and early Iron Age history of the Aegean. And over the years, I shared a subset of this research to all Ancient Origins readers. I will share a more direct link on the last slide, but if you look up my author page on ancientorigins.net, you will find this material. Otherwise, you can visit my personal website at www.petroskoutoupis.com. But to further describe my interest in this field, I see myself more as a literary archaeologist than anything else. There is no field work required. And the purpose of this self-appointed and non-existent discipline is to marry 2 fields which do not cooperate very well with each other. That is, archaeology and literary studies. These literary texts are historical artifacts and must be treated as such. Now, what exactly do I mean by the texts? The answer will be given shortly. Now, what is on today's agenda? First and foremost, a chat about the sea peoples. Don't worry if this topic is unfamiliar to you. I will provide more details as we progress through this presentation. But before that, you will be transported to a time of myth, an age of heroes, when demigods battled monsters of legend, but how much of it was legend? More specifically, were Homer's Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid inspired by true events? Is there a historical record of such adventurous seafaring occurring from the time of the end of the Trojan War? What do we know about these authors of these epics and the rest of the Trojan Cycle? And how have the stories evolved with each telling? What hidden wisdom is preserved in these narratives? I will touch on some of these answers today. I love this painting, and I enjoy it even more when seeing it in person at the Art Institute of Chicago. Painted by the French Jean-Baptiste Wicquart in the late 18th century, the illustration depicts Virgil reading the Aeneid to Emperor Augustus and his family. Considered a masterpiece, Virgil was commissioned by Augustus to piece together the random stories of the Trojan refugee Aeneas, the forefather of Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome and the Roman people. The end result was a literary epic, the Aeneid. Most of us should have probably heard about the Trojan War by now. If not from Hollywood, maybe from our days in school. It was a very famous 10-year battle between two powerful forces, the Greeks and the Trojans. And it was fought on Trojan soil over the beautiful Helen. Hers was the face that launched 1,000 Greek ships to the Trojan mainland. It was Paris who wooed her and took her from her husband Menelaus. Menelaus was the brother of the Mycenaean king Agamemnon, son of Atreus. Iliad opens up in the final year of the war and into a bitter dispute between the almighty demigod Achilles and the king of the Achaean Greeks, Agamemnon. It ends at the point when King Priam of Troy pleads with Achilles to get the body of his slain son Hector back from Achilles for ritualistic cremation. The Odyssey briefly recaps the tail end of the war, but mainly tells of the 10-year voyage of Odysseus back home to the Greek island of Ithaca. This is where we learn of the Trojan horse and the deception of the Trojans, which resulted in the Greeks sacking the city. Both the Iliad and Odyssey are attributed to the poet Homer. Not much is known about Homer. All that we do know is quickly dismissed as legend. The rest of these stories in the Trojan Cycle came after Homer's epics and served as a filler to the times before and after the Iliad. The primary focus of my research and this presentation is the time immediately after the war and the voyages of the heroes either returning home or finding a new home. Specifically the narratives, the Odyssey, the Nostoi or Returns, and the Aeneid. Note that these photographs I personally took myself, one of which was when I was granted special access by the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago to investigate a page of papyrus containing a portion of the Iliad. This depicts chapter 2, verses 745 to 764. It was written by the Greek community living in Oxyrhynchus near the Delta region of Egypt and is dated to around the 1st to 2nd century AD. The other is on the main display at the Art Institute of Chicago. The paintings depict both Paris and Helen. About the Odyssey. Again, the Odyssey is one of two Greek poems, the second being the Iliad, attributed to the poet Homer, and is believed to have been composed at the end of the 8th century BC, somewhere in the Greek coastal region of Anatolia, at the time referred to as Ionia. The poem mainly focuses on the Greek hero Odysseus and his journey home after the fall of Troy. It takes him 10 years to reach his home, the island of Ithaca, which is situated in the Ionian Sea after fighting in the 10-year Trojan War. In the meanwhile, assuming that Odysseus has been dead, his wife Penelope and son Telemachus must deal with a group of unruly suitors who are competing for Penelope's hand in marriage and eating Telemachus out of his home while planning his death. And with the returns, part of the Trojan War cycle, the Nostoi, or Returns, was a lost epic of ancient Greek literature, whose author is currently uncertain and focuses on the return home of the Greek heroes after the end of the Trojan War. The date of the composition is uncertain, but the finalized form of the text is typically dated to the 7th or 6th centuries BC. Lastly, we have the Aeneid, written by Virgil between 29 and 19 BC. The Aeneid tells the legendary story of Aeneas, a Trojan survivor of the Trojan War, who traveled to Italy, becoming the ancestor of the Romans. Aeneas was a well-known hero in the Greco-Roman world, having been a character in the Iliad. Virgil took the disconnected tales of Aeneas' wanderings alongside the vague association with the foundation of Rome and fashioned a compelling founding myth. Above you will see episodes of the Odyssey in which Odysseus tries to overcome the Sirens and even the Cyclops Polyphemus. You will also see Aeneas carrying Anchises on his back while battling the Greeks at Troy. The 1st century AD stone relief, also known as the Tabula Iliaca, showcases events from the Iliad. It also shows Aeneas climbing aboard a ship after Troy is sacked. Now that we covered the basics, I want to share this iconic image, because honestly this is exactly where our story begins. Painted by the 6th century Federico Barocci entitled Aeneas Flees Burning Troy, we have a scene that depicts just that. Carrying his father Anchises over his shoulder, Aeneas leads a small group of Trojan refugees out of the now burning citadel, as the Achaean Greeks continue to pillage, plunder, and slaughter all that remains. Obviously, I'm speaking about the end of the Trojan War, the same Trojan War first sung about by the bard we spoke about earlier, Homer, over 2.5 millennia ago, with his infamous opening words, "The wrath sing, goddess of Peleus' son Achilles, that destructive wrath which brought countless woes upon the Achaeans, and sent forth to Hades many valiant souls of heroes, and made them themselves spoil for dogs and every bird. Thus the plan of Zeus came to fulfillment, from the time when first they parted in strife, Atreus' son, king of men, and brilliant Achilles." But before we talk about the Trojan War and the impact of it across the entire Mediterranean, maybe we should spend some time looking into the time right before it. Inhabiting what is today Greece, the Mycenaeans were a dominant force in the eastern Mediterranean. Their influence spread across the entire region. Their power centered around key palace states such as Mycenae, Pylos, and Tiryns on the mainland, to even Knossos on the island of Crete. In the 15th century BC, they displaced the Minoans before them. It is generally believed that the Minoans were weakened by the devastation brought by the volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini, or Thera, in the 16th century BC. Exported Mycenaean goods spread all over the Mediterranean and across the Near East. Today, archaeologists have excavated pottery and art and jewelry, among other things, from Anatolia, that is modern-day Turkey, Megiddo, which is in Israel, Egypt, and even Babylon over in Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq. Other exports included wines, perfumes, and olive oil. It was a time of prosperity for the Mycenaeans, a sort of golden age, or golden era. Things were good, at least for a couple of centuries. Here are some examples of Mycenaean and Cypriot pottery found in Egypt and Megiddo that I personally manhandled and photographed thanks to the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. Again, Mycenaean goods were well known across the entire Mediterranean. To the rest of the world, who were the Mycenaeans? They were an elite group of warriors also known for their strong navy. It was not uncommon for Aegean warriors to become hired mercenaries or paid bodyguards of kings and queens abroad, including the pharaohs of Egypt. What better way to illustrate this than displaying images of their warriors' wealth and once intimidating Cyclopean walls with the emblem of 2 lions at the entrance to the citadel of Mycenae, home of Agamemnon, son of Atreus. So when you picture the types of soldiers or warriors that would have fought at Troy, imagine them to look like this and wear leather or bronze armor similar to that displayed on this slide. We also have an example of the typical boar's tusk helmet, a preserved memory referenced by Homer himself. And now we reach to about 1200 BC, the approximate period of the infamous 10-year war between the Greeks and the Trojans. In this panoramic fresco, we see a triumphant Achilles dragging Hector's lifeless body past the front gates of Troy. But was there ever a Trojan War? Heinrich Schliemann was a wealthy entrepreneur by profession and spent his early retirement years discovering and excavating the sites of Troy at modern-day Hisarlik, Turkey, and also in Mycenae, in the northeastern part of the Peloponnese, Greece, during the late 19th century AD. Unfortunately, he excavated Troy using some unorthodox and disastrous methods. He was not a trained archaeologist, although it should be said that the field of archaeology was somewhat of a newer science at the time. And Schliemann, well, he was a simple man with a passion for Homer. During Heinrich Schliemann's excavations and the excavations by others that followed, identifying Homer's Troy became problematic. For instance, Troy level 6 matched Homer's descriptions of a large and wealthy city with slanting large walls circling the citadel. But level 6H was destroyed by an earthquake around 1300 BC. Troy level 7A, which thrived between 1230 to 1190 BC, didn't seem as grand as the one described by Homer, but did, however, fall to war. It also showcased evidence for a possible siege in which many had to live in uncomfortable and cramped conditions for some time, before eventually succumbing to its captors. It is unclear as to whether the opponents to Troy 7A were Mycenaean Greeks or another group of Aegean peoples. I say Aegean because they discovered Aegean-style arrowheads on the site and in that layer. Mycenaean pottery has also been discovered at Troy. Excavations at the site continued on to the 21st century AD. With each excavation, the site would reveal more clues, although there still remain too many unanswered questions. To the east of Troy ruled the Hittite Empire over most of Anatolia. Centered at Hattusa, near modern-day Bogaskali, formerly Bogaskoy, Turkey. Discovered within the ruins of the Hittite citadel were piles of baked tablets, each written in cuneiform script, but in what was at the time an undeciphered language, until scholars in the 20th century, mid-20th century AD uncovered the Hittite language. It was an early Indo-European language. With its code cracked, these tablets rewrote the history of the late Bronze Age. Written within the translated text were the activities and negotiations between two world powers, the Hittites and the Achaeawa. At first, the origin of the Achaeawa puzzled scholars, but it didn't take long for them to be identified as Homer's Achaeans, or the Mycenaean Greeks. From the 15th century BC to as late as the 12th century BC, the Mycenaeans were involved in assorted activities all along the western Anatolian coast, both for and in opposition to the Hittite Empire. Another key piece of evidence is the reading of a small vassal kingdom to the northwest of Anatolia and west of the Hittite Empire, routinely referred to as Vilusa. Vilusa was immediately identified with Homer's Ilios, which was another name for Troy. This is where we get the name Iliad, as in the Iliad. In the Achaeawa texts, we find references to primitive forms of the names found later in the Homeric epic. Names which include Atreus, Alexandros, which is another name for Paris, Priam, and even Agamemnon. Why would there have been a war to begin with? This was a very important region of the time. It acted as sort of a gateway for all activity traveling not only through the Dardanelles, but also through the Bosphorus Strait, leading in and out of the Black Sea. If you wish to learn more about the discovery of Troy and the evidence of a Trojan War, I would highly recommend the historian Michael Wood's publication and accompanying television documentary series titled In Search of the Trojan War. Its contents may be a bit dated, but it provides a wealth of details leading to the identification of the Troy involved in Homer's war. To quote the political activist Emma Goldman, "No real social change has ever been brought about without a revolution. Revolution is but thought carried into action. Sometimes it takes an unhappy majority to eventually muster the courage and strength to overthrow the sometimes tyrannical and elitist minority." The end of the Late Bronze Age period between 1200 and 1150 BC is defined by the cultural collapse and, in some cases, disappearance of the Mycenaean kingdom, the Hittite Empire in Anatolia and Syria, and the new kingdom of Egypt, extending as far as Syria and Canaan. This cataclysmic event interrupted trade routes and severely reduced literacy, while other cities across the Mediterranean world were violently destroyed and sometimes forgotten to the ages. Following this event, a dark age ensued, which led to the eventual rise of new kingdoms and empires dated between the 11th and 8th centuries BC. I'm talking about the Neo-Hittites, the Syrian kingdoms, the Israelites, and even, or eventually, the Greeks. During the time of the Greek Dark Age, Greece receded into its own territory. The extent of their maritime trading and their overall influence throughout the Aegean shrunk significantly. The palace centers on top of the hilltops fell into ruin. Remember the map I showed earlier showing Tiryns, Pylos, and even Mycenae? Gone. Well, mostly gone. The kings lost their authority and power. What would eventually replace them are smaller city-states led by local chiefs. Writing disappeared and would not be rediscovered until about 850 BC. That is the supposed time of Homer putting his Iliad and Odyssey into written form. It is not really known why we see this socioeconomic collapse. Was it a result of natural disasters, which included a series of earthquakes or famine? Was it an increase in piracy on both land and sea, or political unrest back at home? Was it difficult for many to find work and a way to live? Or a combination of all the above? Does this explain a wave of migrations across the Mediterranean, one involving a group of individuals labeled by the Egyptians as the Sea Peoples, or the peoples of the sea? So, who were the Sea Peoples? The Sea Peoples were an enigmatic confederacy of seafaring raiders from the central and eastern Mediterranean, who sailed east and invaded Anatolia, Syria, Canaan, Cyprus, and Egypt toward the end of the Bronze Age. The term used to refer to these foreign migrants is derived from ancient Egyptian sources, in which we have numerous documented accounts of battles involving them. It should be noted that not all of the Sea Peoples originated from the sea, but also from the land such as Anatolia. The Sea Peoples have been credited for devastating the region and bringing nations and whole empires to an end. They pillaged and plundered and burned whole cities as they passed through. What made up these groups of migrants? We have the Danuna, or Denyen, which are identified as the Denoi of Homeric epic, the Ekwesh, who are also identified as the Achaeans of Homeric epic, the Luca, or Lycians, of southwestern Anatolia, just outside the realm of the Hittite Empire. The Peliset are the most well-known and documented in both ancient Egyptian inscriptions but also the Hebrew Bible, as they are a constant enemy to the Israelites. After warring with the Egyptians under the pharaohs Merneptah and Ramses III, they were eventually relocated from the Nile Delta and to the east in the Levant, in what is today Israel. The Shekelesh are thought to be the Siculi of the Italian island of Sicily. The Sherden are connected with Sardinia, also an island outside of the Italian mainland. It is not known if these migrants either came from these islands or decided to settle it after their Mediterranean voyages, eventually lending their names to it. The Sheridan were well known in the ancient world as served as bodyguards to the Egyptian pharaohs, Canaanite, and even Hittite kings. The identification of the Teresh and Weshesh are a bit more questionable, but it is believed that they are from the regions in and around Italy. The Jaker are believed to come from the regions around Troy. In these photographs I've taken here, you will see a couple of statues depicting the Sardinian soldiers from the Art Institute of Chicago. Scholars have been able to isolate similarities between the Egyptian depictions of the Shardana and the 11th to 6th century BC bronze statuettes excavated from the island of Sardinia, again located to the west of the Italian mainland. While on the top right, you will see an Egyptian depiction of a Philistine on display at the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago. I also have a picture of the Egyptian Nile Delta. The water mass on top is the Mediterranean Sea. It was on the Delta region that the Egyptian pharaohs fought back against the waves of migrants until eventually resettling them eastward. But we still have a problem, or problema. Again, most about what we know of the sea peoples are the references to them in both Egyptian sources and the Hebrew Old Testament. We still dispute their origins and the motivation or reasons for their migrations across the Mediterranean. We also don't know where many of them settled or ended up. Also, these sources are a little bit biased and against them. Remember, the Hebrews despised the Philistines. This is very apparent in the Old Testament. Also, the Egyptians spoke of their conquering the sea peoples. But what if I told you that more secrets surrounding these mysterious groups of peoples exist elsewhere? And it has been staring at us right in the face the entire time. And maybe it exists in Greek and Roman literature, specifically the literature surrounding the aftermath of the Trojan War. Again, I am referring to the Odyssey, the Returns, and the Aeneid. In the Odyssey, not only does Odysseus and his crew travel across the Mediterranean, causing trouble across multiple islands, but there are two specific episodes which seem to recall incidents much more familiar with the activities of the sea peoples. In Book 4 of the Odyssey, we read of Menelaus and his voyage back home from the Trojan War. He says to Telemachus, who was searching for his father Odysseus 10 years after the war, "It was nearly 8 years before I could get home with my fleet. I went to Cyprus, Phoenicia, and the Egyptians. I went also to the Ethiopians, the Sidonians, and the Erebians, and to Libya." In another episode, we are introduced to King Alcinous, the ruler of the mythical Phaeacians on the island of Scheria. These mythical people are not to be confused with the very real Phoenicians. After his daughter Nausicaa found the beat-up Odysseus washed ashore and naked, Odysseus was warmly received by the Phaeacians, but initially was not honest with his identity. When first asked, he tells them that he came from the island of Crete. This is referred to as the Cretan lie. In books 13 and 19 of the Odyssey, Odysseus tells his hosts that he was a Cretan serving under the command of Idomeneus. After the Trojan War, and desiring new adventures, he led a group of men on a raid into Egypt. They would raid the Delta, but upon reaching the Egyptian capital were immediately defeated. Odysseus begged the Egyptian king for mercy and remained on Egyptian soil for 7 years. Do these episodes set in Egypt recall a time when the sea peoples landed on the Nile Delta region and nearly overwhelmed the Egyptians? The Returns, or Nostoi, is a lost Greek epic which exists today only in fragments and referenced by other ancient Greco-Roman authors. Chronologically, it comes after the epic The Sack of Ilium, or the Iliou Persis, and right before the Odyssey. The poem opens up with the Greeks ready to set sail back to Greece. Nestor and Diomedes are the first to reach home. Agamemnon stays behind, and after a few trials himself, eventually arrives home to be slain at the hands of his wife's lover, Aegisthus. Prior to the Greeks setting sail for Troy 10 years earlier, Agamemnon sacrificed his and Clytemnestra's daughter, Iphigenia, to the gods. Clytemnestra never forgave him for this act. Later in the story, Orestes avenges his father's death and kills both Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. Menelaus, on the other hand, sets sail at roughly the same time Nestor and Diomedes do, but encounters a storm, loses some of his ships, and lands in Egypt for several years. Do you recall my mentioning this in Book 4 of the Odyssey in the previous line, as Menelaus is speaking to Telemachus? Vague as it may be, is there a memory of the sea peoples preserved here? We will briefly cover the Aeneid. The entire first half of this epic consists of Aeneas and his fellow Trojans traveling across the entire Mediterranean, almost in the same fashion as Odysseus in the Odyssey. They even pass by the same regions and islands as Odysseus himself. They eventually find themselves in the Tyrrhenian Sea on the western coast of Italy, very close to the islands of Sicily and Sardinia. It is from this region that they eventually embark on the mainland of modern-day Tuscany and begin to fight for Latium. Archaeologists have discovered a 9th or 8th century BC stela from the ancient Sardinian city of Nora, bearing the words Sardana in Phoenician symbols. Did Sardana migrants leave the eastern Mediterranean to resettle on the island of Sardinia and eventually lend their name to the island itself? Remember the Shekelesh? They are only mentioned in passing in the ancient texts of both the Egyptians and the Ugarites of Syria, first making their appearance in the Nile Delta at approximately 1220 BC. They are likely to originate from the western parts of the Anatolian mainland, more specifically Sagalassos, a bit east of Troy. It has also been speculated that they migrated westward and resettled on the island of Sicily, described in later texts as the Cycles. Did these events inspire the later stories of Aeneas? That is a migrant group of warriors traveling westward from Anatolia and across the Mediterranean toward Italy, eventually taking control or influencing key regions. With their cities and nations collapsing, the people took to both the land and the sea in search of a new life and opportunities. This collection of activities involving the Mycenaeans and later sea peoples would eventually form two fluid narratives to be sung by traveling bards such as Homer. The role of the bard was to entertain, guided by the muses and taking artistic liberties where necessary. The bard would weave mythology into his or her story. It was the mythology that organized historical facts, be it from separate historical eras. Will we ever truly identify the adventurous seafaring of Odysseus or Aeneas-like warriors? Maybe not, but we do have the pieces to collectively create a series of events that would inspire such tales. Now, before I continue on, I also wanted to make mention this bust, or this statue head, is supposedly depicting Aeneas. This is supposed to be Menelaus, and this is supposed to be Odysseus. And here I will conclude with the presentation portion of this lecture. Again, you can read a lot of this content discussed earlier either by going to my personal website at www.petroskoutoupis.com or visiting my author profile page on www.ancient-origins.net. Now, you may be wondering, do I have a book on this research? The answer is no. The initial draft of this book is nearing completion, but I am currently negotiating with publishers. So keep your eyes open for news surrounding this. either on my personal website or maybe even the Ancient Origins website. Or just follow me on Twitter. But note that my Twitter handle tends to focus more on my technology-related work, but I do occasionally post historical-related materials. This is only the tip of the iceberg. My upcoming book provides many more details and more connections. The sea peoples become less mysterious when we look into the epics of the ancients.
Ancient Origins specializes in reconstructing the story of humanity's past. And honestly, for those of you who love anything ancient, mysterious, and the unexplained, it's the best resource online for you, providing a variety of content. But more importantly, it's helping us understand the subjects that we all love. From the fringe to the mainstream, you get the best of everything. But if you want access to even greater content, I highly suggest you becoming a premium member to Ancient Origins. And for those of you who may ask, okay, why? I have an answer for you. One, it is a treasure trove of information. It gives you even more access to the subjects that you love. From ebooks, webinars, expeditions, even more articles, but in some cases, you get to talk to the experts themselves. And by being a subscriber to Ancient Origins, you are continuing to help them make history matter. Ancient Origins literally has something for everyone. So, before we get to the presentation, check out the links in the video description below. I'm going to provide you with a variety of references to Ancient Origins from their Facebook page and other social media outlets to the very heart of the Ancient Origins website itself to help people like me and you better understand the subjects of history, mystery, and the unexplained that we all love.